Hey everyone, me Kevin here. I was blown away by this piece in Bloomberg, and we've got to talk about it because it gives us a lot of insight into what may be actually going on with real estate, and it potentially leaves more questions than answers. So you might not know this, but I spent 16 years growing up in Florida. I think Florida has a lot of great features to it. The fact that the water is warm and the beaches are amazing is awesome, and the hurricanes, once you live through them, they're not that scary. But insurance rates do suck big time, especially since I pay about 2,200 bucks a month. I'm sorry, 2,200 bucks a year for a homeowner's insurance policy for a 3 bedroom, 2 bath house in California. That probably costs about $6,000 to $7,000 in Florida, thanks to hurricanes. Now, of course, the California one does exclude hurricane or exclude earthquakes, so maybe that's not entirely a fair comparison, but that is the comparison that people make. So anyway, let's try to actually get to some facts though. What are some facts and what are we starting to see happen with the Florida real estate market, and what does it potentially say for the rest of the United States, especially since you might be thinking, hey, eventually I want to get into owning real estate. And I want to make sure I buy in an area that I really believe in, that ends up going up in value, not down in value. We don't want to be in what will end up being ghost towns. In fact, that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that individuals make when they buy real estate is they simply sort cities by cap rate. And then all of a sudden you look at a city and you're like, oh, well, that place gets me a 10 cap or like a 12% cash on cash return. And then you go look at the city and you're like, bro, it's in the middle of nowhere. The population is plummeting. The poverty rate is skyrocketing and everyone's leaving and there's no job to get here. Those areas carry higher cap rates because they have to. In other words, the market works in incredible ways. The market says, hey, if we want to sell a property, we have to offer the purchaser a higher yield to be willing to purchase there because the town might go bankrupt. In other words, there's a risk that's associated with that area. So usually when you see higher cap rates, the first thing you should be thinking of is higher risk. This is why, in my opinion, the best way to buy real estate is, of course, buying fixer-upper real estate and conducting construction arbitrage. I call those wedge deals. But anyway, ignore all that for a moment. What's most important is when you, on the flip side, look at an area and go, man, that area sucks. San Diego properties are selling for a 2 cap. Who would buy there? Well, golly, everyone would because everybody wants to live there. San Diego is beautiful. I don't live in San Diego. I wish I lived in San Diego. It's awesome. But again, that just puts some background on cap rate here. The point of this video, though, is this. Florida has been a huge beneficiary of the COVID boom, but now it looks like there's a little bit of a flip flop. And I want to dive into this because a few days ago I theorized that there's probably going to be a reversal of the work from home trend, that movement towards Austin and Boise and maybe even, Vegas or Arizona or whatever. And the reason I theorized that was because over the last about 6 months of traveling to hundreds of different cities, or the same cities multiple times, whatever. What I noticed is an inflection. I noticed more rentals hitting the market, more rentals staying on the market longer. And it made me start wondering about, has the rental market hit a bottom? And I don't know the answer to that. We know that home prices have actually started recovering very well, which was the opposite of what a lot of people believed, including myself. But buyers just got used to higher interest rates, partly, actually, potentially primarily because of low housing inventory. But what is this Bloomberg article about? Well, let's go through it together a little bit and see if we can learn something. So, a stampede of Northeasterners in search of sunshine and cheaper living in Florida sent the Florida housing market into a frenzy throughout the pandemic. Single family home prices in Florida have flattened. However, now, for the first time since 2011, climbing almost 50% in the last 3 years. In other words, real estate in Florida has absolutely boomed. In fact, here you could see home price growth in just the last few years on a what is this, a quarter to quarter? This is a month over month basis. No, it's not month over month. It's monthly compared year over year. Every month they're showing you how much prices have gone up compared to the prior year, and so you can see it's been sitting around. This comparison of every month you're looking, going, yep, prices are up again, 14% compared to last year, 14%, 15%, 16%, 22%, 27%, and it's just continued. Well, now all of a sudden we have officially gone to flat. That is, there it is, 0%. Look at that for April year over year. Now, that is actually impressive because if you consider what's happened nationwide, home prices are actually slightly negative nationwide year over year, only about 2 to 3%. And if you go to some specific markets, you'll see a little bit more of a decline. Remember, about peak in March of 2022 to trough of about December of 2022, prices did fall about 10% nationwide. We've just seen that recovery already. Take a look at this particular chart here. This is the Redfin Data Center. The blue line shows you home prices in 2023. And what you're finding, and what happens here is nationwide, you could see that home prices were down about 1% year over year right now. But if you actually look at this peak of 2022 at about 387, 385, relatively flat over here, and we compare that to the bottom in about December, January, right over here on the right side, it's December, 350. Bottom over here, I guess maybe in this case, nationwide was closer to January, 341. You make that comparison, 341 divided by 380, you're down about 11%. Divided by 387, 341 divided by 387, you're seeing this about 12% peak to trough decline. But it was really an adjustment led by interest rates, and markets have recovered thanks to inventory rising. Uh, Thanks to stable inventory. Now, it's possible that a rise in inventory could end up driving prices down again. What seems to be more interesting to pay attention to now, in addition to, of course, watching inventory, is watching what happens with demographic trends. And that's where we get to this Florida piece. The pullback in Florida, while still moderate compared to downturns in areas like Phoenix and Austin, shows the limits of the pandemic boon that has priced out locals and inflated the cost of entry for newcomers. One top destination for New Yorkers heading south, Miami, is now the most unaffordable metro area in the United States. Billionaire venture capitalist and our buddy over at Palantir, Peter Thiel, said last month he'd be reluctant to relocate his operations to Florida because home prices in the Sunshine State have risen so much. Interestingly, when I had dinner with Kathy Wood, she indicated that she purposely didn't move to Miami because it was so expensive there and it had already become such a hub that she'd rather move her operations to Tampa, which she did in hopes of creating sort of more of a West Coast of Florida hub. But it's the wealthy who have the most to gain from Florida's lack of a state income tax. For the middle class, other costs bite too, including property insurance, and then of course, whether that's toll roads or registration fees or sales taxes, whatever it may be, property taxes themselves. And the fact is, you have this bizarre, almost slowing of migration into Florida. In fact, here statistically, we can see that migration into Florida sits so far at about 56% compared to people moving out, which is down from 58% last year and down from 62% in 2021. And so there's this question now of, is this demographic transition in real estate going to end up rejiggering again the real estate market? And I'm the last person who likes to say, wait to buy real estate. But I would argue that there are a lot of areas that people have moved to for pandemic related benefits, like work from home, that would actually be very risky to invest in today. It might actually be better if you were looking at buying real estate in various different areas or you're trying to figure out what area you want to invest in. It might actually be better to start investing in areas that you know, no matter what, demographically are always going to attract people to live there. Then I had a theory. I go, okay, we can look at best places to live all day long, but a lot of those rankings are based on data from 2019, 2020, maybe 2021, and a lot has changed since then. A lot of these areas have become relatively unaffordable, and some of their rankings are potentially at risk of falling away. And I also couldn't really find a link between, oh, yeah, these are definitely areas that people want to live because of weather or schools or whatever. It was more of, oh, no, people are going to live there because of affordability and work from home. So, what I thought is, okay, if we're getting away from work from home, then where will people want to live? And so I put myself into the shoes of a person who would want to move. And I thought, well, I want to be where I can safely live, not have to worry about crime, and send my children to safe and good quality schools. And so I thought, okay, that is consistent with what I've heard every real estate agent tell me in my travels over the last 6 months. The best neighborhoods always seem to be where the best schools are. Now, that's not necessarily to say one causes the other, because it's entirely possible that The best neighborhoods are the ones that are the most expensive, and therefore there are the most tax dollars to go create the best schools, right? But for whatever reason, there seems to be a link with the best schools and people wanting to live there, right? To some extent, as a parent, that makes sense. I have two children, I have two more on the way, and I want to live in an area with the best schools. And so what I did is I searched just sort of on Google, and I kind of compiled a list and thought, okay, let's pull the top 20 cities to live in with the best schools. And this isn't to say that this is the best data set. It struck me as interesting at first. So I'm not saying this is guaranteed the best thing to look at, and obviously there are a lot of problems with this particular state. But look at this. Out of the list of 20 cities with the best schools in America. The first one was actually Naperville, Illinois, which is a place I've been wanting to go to. I've visited Chicago a couple times since, but I still haven't made it out to Naperville or Naperville, however you say it. That was interesting. But there were a lot of miscellaneous states that had sort of one city on this list. And so what I did is I pasted the whole list into ChatGPT to just make it easier for me. And I'm like, yo, just rank how many times the cities were in what state. And look at the result that I got. I got 9 out of the top 20 that ended up in California, 3 in Texas, and these were cities I've heard of before, like Plano, Texas. A lot of great schools out there. You've got a lot of newer construction out there as well, as it's sort of like pushing out from the Dallas, Fort Worth area. But anyway, Illinois, that's the Naperville one, Michigan, Washington, Virginia, Kansas, Colorado, Mass. But all of those only had one city, with the exception of Texas, that had 3. California had 9. Now, I know California's got a large population. It's got somewhere around 10% of the entire country's population just in one state. But what then I wanted to do was say, hey, how many of those top 20 are actually in Southern California, which is where the best weather is in the entire country? You can't dispute that, because the best, most human conducive weather in the world is known as the chaparral climate, which is generally found around the Mediterranean, the southern tip of Africa, the southern edge of Australia in a certain part, and Southern California. Only about 7% of the world is covered by the Mediterranean climate, and it is the most conducive for human habitation. It's generally because the temperature is like 68 to 74 year round, maybe 76, somewhere in there. So it just depends on which particular part. But it's very, very moderate. You could look this up. This is simple. It's not something to dispute. And look at the result. From the list you provided, I don't live in any of those cities, by the way. Just keep that in mind. I'm not trying to be biased here. I thought this was very interesting. From the list you provided, 7 of the cities were in Southern California specifically. And I started this video out by yapping about San Diego. And I thought to myself, well, of course, people want to live there. So they're willing to pay. They're willing to buy a property with a lower cap rate to get the best schools. And so my point here is what if over the next 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even decade, we have a transition where people actually concentrate back at sort of a work locally, but now we have this desire to live and work where we want to live, where the weather is most conducive and the schools are potentially the best. That potentially could flip-flop some of these ratings of which towns you'd actually want to invest in. The long and short out of all of this is, if you're looking to shop for real estate and you're not exactly sure where you want to buy yet because you're not convinced you want to buy where you are living, then maybe the correct answer is actually looking first at where do people want to live, whether it's weather, whether it's schools, or otherwise. If people are only moving to an area because it's the most affordable, then they'll leave as soon as it's not affordable anymore. But if people want to live in an area regardless of the cost, then maybe there's a reason why it would make the most sense to invest in the highest quality areas first and foremost. It's an interesting theory, and I think it's something that's definitely subject to comment. And I'm very curious to hear what y'all have to say. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. These are my thoughts, and it's something that I'm going to be researching and studying a lot more over the next 3 to 6 months before we start going and pulling the trigger with spending all the money we've got buying real estate and fixing up properties so we can finally add some more rental supply to the market. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you soon.